Hello, and welcome to Global Perspectives, Mobilizing Advocacy Initiatives for Older LGBTQI Persons, hosted by the International Federation on Aging, IFA, EGAL Canada, and SAGE. My name is Serena, and I'm excited to be moderating the panel today. This webinar is an opportunity to learn about inspiring ideas and initiatives undertaken by regional champions that bring focus to the rights of LGBTQ older people. This webinar will bring perspectives from Kenya, Costa Rica, and the United States. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. A copy of the webinar recording and slide deck will be made available to all registrants following the webinar. This webinar can also be accessed at any time through the IFA platform. Additionally, participants are encouraged to ask questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A feature. We ask that you don't use the chat feature for this. We will try our best to answer these questions during the Q&A period. However, if we are unable to answer these questions because of time, panelists will share their responses for any outstanding questions in the post-webinar mailer. Participants are encouraged to post resources to share with everyone in the chat feature, which we will send out afterwards. It is my pleasure to welcome our panelists. Daniela Bolaños Torres is the coordinator of the Political Advocacy Unit for Centro de Investigación y Promoción para América Central de Derechos Humanos, CPAC, from Costa Rica. Jeffrey Walimba is the program manager for Ishtar MSN from Nairobi, Kenya. And Michael Adams is the CEO of SAGE from the United States. I will now turn things to Daniela, who is our first panelist. Please welcome Daniela.
Thank you, and hello everyone. I want to thank IFA for this space. We believe it is very important, a very important opportunity, and I'm glad to be part of it with such amazing people. Next slide, please. Next one. First of all, I want to explain what does the CPAC name means. It is the abbreviation of Investigation and Promotion of Human Rights Center for Central America. We are an NGO with more of 2 decades of experience in Costa Rica doing advocacy for LGBT people through a work based in 3 fundamental, strategic, and interconnected principles: political advocacy, investigation, and human rights promotion, understood as processes of education and sensitization. And next, please. In the last years, we have been working especially about topics related to older LGBT adults with different projects, and also according to 3 guide topics. The first is aging, conceived as a human natural process that involves a lot of social challenges. Furthermore, that is a global tendency that older adults will represent more and more a very important and representative percentage of the whole population. For this reason, it must be a priority for the state to take actions in order to recognize older people as right subjects. The other topic is sexuality as a part of every person during life. Sadly, there are social constraints that reduces sexuality just to sexual practices, and it is not understood through an integral vision. Sexuality actually is made up of different components as bonds with other people, corporality, eroticisms, cognitive elements, ethics, and rights. Also, around older adult sexuality, there exists a lot of myth, or for example, that they do not have any sexuality at all. Or also that there are not LGBTQI older people. And the other topic is rights. As a consequence of the last point, human rights become an important topic, particularly sexual and reproductive rights for older adults and also older LGBTQI adults. Next, please. In order to do advocacy around older LGBTQI adults' concerns, we have developed an approach called Human Dignity Integral Approach. It is based on the idea that every person has a human dignity that must be appreciated as an individual and collective component of its life and it must be respected. But the reality is that this is not true for several people because they face different forms of discrimination. This affects the ideal to recognize us as a complex and diverse human beings. That happens also when we talk about sexuality, because as I say, because it is not conceived from an integral view, and people are excluded, for example, for their sexual orientation and gender identity. This approach helped us to insist about the importance of the respect and the warranty of human rights for everyone, especially when we are speaking about older people's sexualities and older LGBT adults. Next, please. Also, we have a special advocacy strategy called the cock drugs strategy, where, where we identify a problematic or need, and then we select certain ways for actions, always looking for possible alliances with decision makers or people with power over our problem. The idea is that these people help us to enter into spaces that are commonly restricted for civil society. As cockroach, we get inside institutions through little spaces in order to make viable proposals, negotiations, and advances step by step to accomplish our goal by a low profile. Of course, this strategy has its limitation, but it helps us to build better support. Next, please. Actually, this strategy has been successful to mobilize proposals with other NGOs in order to make a group for the older LGBT adults topics. As an example, we have been building a regional alliance with the objective to do advocacy from different countries. This alliance is called the American Alliance for LGBT older adults. But what challenges do we face while doing advocacy for older LGBT adults? I am going to mention some of them. Please, next. The first one is the data and information access. The information available around these topics, it is very scarce. This increases the barrier for older LGBT adults to access information by themselves and to do advocacy directly. And also there could be a fear to do it because of the discrimination. Also, there is another problem because decision makers are constantly asking for data to take actions. So if there's none, sometimes the problem it is not taken seriously, or we say that they wash their hands and told the NGOs that they have to produce data. The other problem is that bureaucracy and prioritized agenda. That means that a lot of advocacy topics are commonly affected by the slowness of bureaucracy, more if they are not considered important. This helps to the abandonment and oblivion of individuals as LGBT older adults. The other challenge is around resources and sustainability. As a little NGOs doing advocacy, we face the problem as other ones of having limited resources and being constantly fighting for our sustainability because we depend on international cooperation. In addition, a lot of offers of this cooperation are insufficient and restricted, and self-sustainability it is not always possible. The other one is making a strong and good alliances. Sometimes the range of a little NGO work is limited because of the lack of resources, not just economic, also the human ones. This leads to the necessity of acting by alliances with other NGOs, but sometimes they could be very good, and other times they could be very bad. The other challenge is context adaptations processes. It is not easy for an NGO to adapt its work because of sudden context changes. This is a challenge we assume sometimes we achieve it, but other times it is not possible. That is why I want to talk about some challenges during this pandemic. The first one is pandemic concern versus advocacy topics. Obviously, Authorities are focused on the pandemic problems as it should be, but this has helped that the topics around older LGBT adults' rights become less important, and also advocacy processes are slower. The other challenge is around technological inequalities. The world with this pandemic become more virtual, but there are still a lot of gaps in the access for technologies. Also, sometimes processes are incompatible with these mechanisms or are more restricted in comparison, for example, when we were able to arrange presential meetings. Other challenge is the readaptation of strategies. Related to the last point, some advocacy strategies have to be readapted, but it is more difficult to know if we are having positive results and also if there are people caring about these topics. And the other challenge we identify is justify the project's continuity. Obviously, it was impossible to foresee that it will be a pandemic when we were planning our project, and obviously not a pandemic of this nature. I think this is a challenge because we have to keep looking forward for alternatives to sustain our projects and also to justify that we still need the international cooperation. So this is a little review of our experience doing advocacy for older LGBT adults. We hope to go into a deeper discussion with the next part of the panel. And next slide, please. And here is the general information of our NGO and also the information about the Alliance. Thank you so much for this space, and I give the word for the other person.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Next, we'll turn to Jeffrey. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I hope you can all hear me well. My name is Jeffrey. I'm the Programs Manager of ISHTA MSM. ISHTA is a community-based organization based in Nairobi that works on HIV programming and wellness for men of sex and men in Kenya. We work on service delivery, community development, advocacy, and research. One thing that I noted is that there is not much programming around older LGBT persons. And as you all know, that Kenya is among other countries that still has criminalizing laws against same-sex relations. And this has double impact for people as they age, because they are most likely to live in poverty, homelessness, isolation, depression, alcohol dependency, and also just because of the fact that they do not have families, then they live in depression. So I went deeper to just try and find out if there's any research or more findings on older LGBT persons. And I noticed that in Africa, there's limited research that has been done to cover that. And also, when you look at the gaps that are available because of criminalization and inequality, we find that there's a lot of structural challenges, which include policies, availability of policies that target older LGBT persons. I tried to find out about issues that maybe they can be going, and one of it is exclusion, because when people go, as they grow old, they feel like they're being excluded, not only within the communities they live in, but also within the programs. And one thing that I felt like it is important for us to do is to understand the gaps in programming for older LGBT persons, and also to just look at what are the issues around, as people grow old, do they feel like they're socially excluded as they age. Next slide. Yes. So when I was consulting my colleagues, we came about with a few questions that we feel we would push some of our partners and donors to look at. One, at what point does one consider aging amongst LGBT community in Africa? And here we'd look at issues around culture, race, religion, education, and employment, which is some of the issues that our community members might be going through. What are the gaps? What are the coping mechanisms of aging, what services do we need for older LGBT adults, and even if, as we discussed, because as people age, they get some existing conditions. So we were looking at how do we program for aging with disability or pre-existing conditions. And we came up with one research agenda, and this is what we're trying to work on, is understanding the quality of life among older LGBT persons in Kenya. Next slide. If we can move to the next slide, if you don't mind. So one thing that we noticed again, which is what I've reiterated in the past slides, is that we do not have interventions for older LGBT persons, and we need to have research done to document the lived experiences of LGBT elders, and also focus so much in understanding at what point do people feel, because with such challenges, people tend to go back to the closet. So we need to find out what are some of the things that we need to do. My key recommendations, one is to have inclusive programs for LGBT adults, invest in research to understand the needs of LGBT adults in Africa, encourage donors and funders to support programming for LGBT adults, and have employment programs for LGBT adults and support systems. Next slide. Is just to acknowledge SAGE. I met SAGE when I was in the States for a fellowship in 2016. And through them, I have become one of the advocates for older LGBT persons. ISHTA, the organization that I work for, the Gay and Lesbian Coalition, and INED, which is one of the organizations that also works on advocacy issues. Next slide. So just to thank you all and tell you that a village without the elderly is like a well without water. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now turn to Michael. Michael.
Okay, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here and be participating in this webinar, and in particular to be sharing the program with Daniela and Jeffrey, who have been such amazing colleagues. I am the CEO of SAGE, which is the national LGBTQ aging organization in the United States, and we've had the great privilege in recent years of developing partnerships with CPAC, with Ishtar MSM, and with a variety of other NGOs across the globe that are increasingly focused on the needs of LGBTQ older adults. One thing I want to note that I think is interesting is that even though obviously there are vast differences in culture and politics and social conditions across Costa Rica and Kenya and the US, there are some very similar themes when it comes to LGBTQ older folks, and that includes for example, in Daniela's presentation, one of her early slides made reference to increasing visibility, to making those who are invisible visible, which I thought was really striking, given that, in fact, invisibility is such a primary challenge for older folks in LGBTQ communities in the US. Similarly, Jeffrey, talked about the concept of marginalization and exclusion from our own communities. Certainly in the US in recent months with COVID-19, what we've seen has been a tremendous exacerbation of the unique challenges faced by LGBTQ older folks in our country as a result of COVID-19. And those unique challenges include what are already high levels of social isolation, which obviously have been made worse by stay-at-home orders under COVID-19. Very thin support networks, given that, among other reasons, the vast majority of LGBTQ older folks in the US are not parents, or do not have adult children to support them as they age, and are much more likely to grow old, single, and living alone. Also, significant health disparities, which obviously have come to the fore during COVID-19 to really put LGBTQ older adults really at the epicenter of the pandemic in the country. And something that I cannot emphasize enough, especially given the current spasm of racist attacks against Black people in the United States, racial disparities. So we see in the US that that LGBTQ older folks who are people of color have to live on much lower incomes, face race discrimination, face a broader variety of health challenges. And here again, this has just been exacerbated by COVID-19, including the fact that Black Americans and Brown Americans are significantly more likely to not have access to the medical treatment they need if they get sick, and are dying at much higher rates in the pandemic. So what do we do about this? I again want to pick up on some of the themes that that Daniela and Jeffrey touched on, and that includes the notion of policy advocacy in order to improve policy responses so that they benefit LGBTQ older folks. In recent years, with the election of Donald Trump in 2016, the politics of geography and finding the right places to be able to advance policy on behalf of LGBTQ older folks has been very important in our country. And because of the general hostility of the Trump administration to LGBTQ rights and communities, that means that in the US, we have increasingly focused a lot of our policy advocacy at the state level. And I think, you know, that's a theme that it seems to me is significant, and it ties back to one of the points that Daniela was making about really looking for those opportunities where you can find them. Interestingly, though, over the last year, we've been able to make some policy progress at the federal level, which is very surprising given the context of the Trump administration and right-wing politicians in control of the U.S. Senate. But you know, I have to say I love the notion of the cockroach strategy, because I think that it really helps to explain how it is that SAGE won a major federal policy victory for LGBTQ older folks in the last Congress, and that was by really using a very low-profile approach, working with friendly members of Congress, including folks who historically have not had a track record of support for LGBTQ rights. And we were able to actually secure for the very first time some explicit language providing protections for LGBTQ older adults in a federal law called the Older Americans Act, which governs how federal spending for elder services in our country will be distributed. So I think that our experience over the past year indicates to us that even in the face of tremendous hostility, in the face of a very, very homophobic and transphobic Trump administration, that you know, with sometimes with subtlety and with care, we can still make policy progress. I also wanted to flag a couple of more points before I wrap up, and one is to underline the points that Daniela and Jeffrey made about the importance of alliances and partnership. This has really been fundamental in SAGE's work, and it includes alliances at the international level through the Alianza Americana that SAGE has joined with CPAC and other Latin American colleagues, and also within the U.S. Within the U.S., SAGE partners closely with national aging organizations that work in people of color communities. We also work closely with the largest aging organization in the United States, the AARP and AARP Foundation, which especially the foundation has made some significant difference and positive difference for our work and for LGBTQ older folks. And with LGBTQ organizations. So, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's been very important for SAGE to try to reach out to corporate audiences and corporate leadership, but we don't really have access to those audiences in the same way that some of our LGBTQ organizations do. And so we partnered with an organization called Out Leadership that helped us to reach corporate leaders at the most senior levels and talk with them about the severe challenges that LGBTQ older adults are facing, and in particular in regard to COVID-19. And I think I'll wrap up with perhaps a positive word in the midst of some very severe challenges. Obviously, this global pandemic that we're currently in has created very, very difficult circumstances all across the globe, in the US and certainly in New York City, where SAGE is headquartered. And at the same time, the challenges that we face are causing us to think differently about how we do our work, and there will be some advantages to that. So just to give one example, at SAGE, many of our service programs that we provide to LGBTQ older folks have been provided in person, on site, creating safe physical spaces where LGBTQ older people can come to participate in programs and hang out with each other, learn from each other, etc. All of those programs have been forced to be closed down as a result of the pandemic. But what we have done instead is that we have quickly shifted our programming to virtual online programming that people can participate in. Now, there are some limitations to that approach, including the fact that many folks in our country still don't have access to the internet and don't have the equipment, and especially low-income folks and folks in people of color communities or rural areas. But many people do, and what we're seeing is that it's allowing a broader cross-section of LGBTQ older folks to connect with each other and with SAGE and participate in programs, including older folks who are in parts of the country that are very hostile to LGBTQ people, older folks who therefore as a result are often closeted and not comfortable coming into explicit LGBTQ spaces. And the creation of virtual programming is opening up new opportunities for them to connect in ways that feel safe and that don't feel threatening. So it's just one example of, I think, a silver lining as we adapt to the new normal that's being created by the global pandemic of COVID-19. And I believe that my time is about up. So with that, I will wrap up. Thank you so much. I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you to Michael, and thank you to our panelists for your excellent presentations. We have some wonderful questions. I'm going to start with a question from Vinjay Naradu, who's with the Commission for the Rights of Older People of DIS-MOI. It's a three-part question, so I'll repeat it. Vijay's question relates to the plight of older LGBTQI persons, precisely older women, who have no support from a companion and no adequate financial resources. Are they subjected to almost permanent confinement, barring COVID-19, hence living in solitude? And then the third part of the question is, how do cultural practices / religious beliefs impact on the freedom of LGBTQI, and how we as a civil society can influence policymakers on the rights of these persons to live the lifestyle of their choice. So to review, the plight of older LGBTQI persons, specifically older women who have no companion and no financial resources. Are they in permanent confinement, barring COVID-19, and living in solitude? And how do the cultural practices and religious beliefs impact on the freedom of LGBTQI? And then second part of that last piece is how we as a civil society can influence policymakers on the rights of these persons to live the lifestyle of their choice. So I'm going to open it up to see if there's a panelist who would like to take that one.
Well, this is Michael. I can start, and I imagine Daniela or Jeff may want to add as well. But just to touch on those three excellent points briefly, I would say based on our experience in the US that we know that it's very, very important to tailor both our program interventions and our policy advocacy to particular sub-communities within a larger community. It is just not the case that LGBTQ older people are one homogeneous and monolithic group. And so, for example, in the U.S., we know that older women, older lesbians have higher levels of poverty than older gay men. And this is something that we need to adjust for in terms of the kinds of programming that we create and the policy advocacy that we undertake. It also shows the importance of research, by the way, because we wouldn't know that, from a kind of a database perspective, were it not for research. And similarly, part of what was embedded in the question were cultural practices and religious practices. I mean, there are a couple of ways to think about that. One is that we know, working with tens of thousands of LGBTQ older adults in our country, that within our community, there are a wide variety of cultural practices and religious practices among LGBTQ older folks that must be respected and celebrated. And at the same time, at least in the U.S., religion and right-wing religious forces are often opposing equality and support for LGBTQ folks, and in particular, and including for LGBTQ older adults. And a lot of SAGE's policy advocacy is focused on trying to ensure that private religious beliefs don't become public policy. I guess, and on COVID-19, to what I was referencing earlier, I do think it's going to be a while, given the public health threat, before many older folks are able to emerge back out into society fully as they were before. And that's why we have to be thinking about different strategies to work with people in their homes. And we don't have time now, but be happy in another point or offline to talk about some of the ways that SAGE has been doing that.
Thank you, Michael. Daniela or Jeffrey, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Jeffrey, then Daniela. Thank you.
Yeah, I think culture and religion play a very huge role in the lives of LGBT people, especially in pushing them back to the closet or coming out at any point, especially in Africa. I'll give an example of myself. I just turned 42. But culturally, if someone of my age is expected to have a family, you're expected to have children who are going to start maybe taking care of you. You expect that is going to be your support system. In a scenario that currently I do not have kids, already I'm being boxed in a position of saying that like a misfit, someone who does not even have a say in within the society that we live in. So that also, to me, kind of pushes LGBT people to kind of try and conform to maybe heteronormative lifestyles, trying to marry just to pretend that they have something to go on, or just and also just making them feel like they're lesser human beings, and affects them in so many ways. So to me, I feel like, especially in countries that are still like in Africa, it's a huge challenge, and it's something that we're trying to navigate this space.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Daniela?
Yeah, I think around this topic about women, it is very important because when we talk about our approach, we are very specific about sexualities, and we know that women, we face violence around our sexualities, and also in general terms in social topics. So that is why intersectionality, it is very important to talk about specific necessities around these topics. The other one, I think that the question was how to address this problem during COVID, because if you think about it, older adults has been identified as a risk population. And there, we are talking about, yeah, we have to be isolated, but it mostly, it is a problem because it increases abandonment. And for LGBT older adults, this is more radical. And how we address the decision makers during this pandemic, I think it is a challenge. But what we can do mostly is to mobilize the topics through social media, sending letters, to make visible this problem by these virtual mechanisms.
Thank you. And Daniela, the next question is for you. This comes from Kathleen Edwards. I've heard individuals who live in long-term care homes experience increased prejudice from staff when it comes to policy regarding partner rights for visitation, inappropriate language used by staff to address residents. She asks, what are some solutions to address the existing prejudice and stigma that exists within frontline staff and policy in long-term care?
Yeah, some years ago, CIPAC made an investigation in Costa Rica. There were investigations in Panama and El Salvador, and actually the conclusion was that in health or care centers, there is non-education around, in general, about sexualities of older adults, and there is not education. I think that could be one solution, to ask for education. That I don't know. I know sometimes it is very difficult because of the resources, but we need to educate people that are formed to take care in these centers about sexualities, about rights, about not sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination. And also, but this is our case, we have older adults like authority around these topics, and they make this policy for aging and older adults, and we try to assure that in this policy there is a component of respect of sexuality, in order that this policy that has some impact about the rules of care centers, to assure that these topics will be part of the education of the people that take care in these centers. So I know sometimes it is difficult, and it depends on the context, but because in the other countries, the problem is that these centers are not regulated. So I think we have a lot of challenges around that.
Thank you very much, Daniela. I'm going to group a couple of related questions together, and I'd love to put these to Jeffrey to start. So I'm going to just read a couple of them, but they're thematically linked. In Brazil, the challenge number one, this comes from Alexandre Colaci. In Brazil, challenge number one is the overlapping of discrimination, stigma, and inclusion, the double jeopardy. LGBTI and old in an increasingly more homophobic society led by an alpha macho president with fanatical supporters behind him. Though his approval rate is around 30%, his authoritarian government closes the eyes to unprecedentedly high murder rates of LGBTI. And then related, Alexandre goes on to say LGBT phobia is on the increase here and elsewhere in the world. It was difficult for the current old LGBTI cohort to come out from the closet. Now they're being forced back. And then I'm going to move to Farah Naz Rahman, who asks, how can we address the needs and rights of older LGBTQ in the countries where homosexuality is not legally accepted? As a citizen from Bangladesh, what actions can I take for the large underground LGBT community? And let's start with Jeffrey.
I think I thank you for the questions. I can relate to most of those questions. You can note that Kenya we tried to go to court first to have the decrim case where we were trying to argue about criminalizing same-sex relations. The case did not succeed, one, because it was considered to be against our cultural beliefs and religious beliefs, which just shows that this is something that we still constantly have to advocate for. one thing we have noticed again is that most of our programs, even how we do them, it's geared towards young populations. And as people grow older, yes, they tend to go back to the closet. One, because of the same reasons, culture and religion. So it is a challenge that most countries that are still criminalized are struggling with. What we need to do is to, one, document the lived realities of these older LGBT persons and tell their stories so that we can come up with, one, policy documents, and also come up with inclusive programs that have everyone on board. The other thing is to continue having safe spaces, which is something that is not there. The safe people, you'll see that as people progress in age, they tend to avoid such safe spaces, those spaces because, one, they no longer feel acceptable or they no longer feel they can fit in. So we need to come up with programs that also have ideas that can also make everyone feel like they can fit in a particular space. We are still struggling with that. We have made strides, yes, because we have clinics and everything, but still, I feel like there's a lot that is still needed to be done.
Thank you. And thank you for those thoughtful answers. I'm going to ask a couple questions related to COVID-19, and these are for all the panelists. I'm going to start with, sorry, I'm scrolling through here. From Genesis Rafael Lopez Ramirez. For AAAM, I'm not sure what that is. Maybe you can put that in the chat, Genesis. What strategies are being carried out during the quarantine to take care of the mental health of LGBT adults? Many of them live alone. And then related from Faraz Rahman, the COVID-19 situation has affected the LGBT community of Bangladesh, which includes loss of job and poverty among this marginalized group. What are the ways to address this? And Faz has that as a two-part question. Older LGBTQ people mostly live alone. How best their health issues can be addressed during COVID-19? And anyone can answer.
Well, maybe I can, this is Michael, maybe I can start by touching on the mental health strategies. This has been a huge challenge, obviously, for folks, LGBTQ older folks who, as we discussed earlier, already deal with significant social isolation and now are essentially confined to their homes. One of the strategies that SAGE is using to address that is what we what we call telephonic support, and it's a fairly simple and straightforward approach, which is we've organized ourselves to make regular telephone calls in New York City, for example, where we're headquartered. We're regularly calling about 3,000 LGBTQ older folks that we know and work with, and the fundamental orientation of those calls is to make sure that that the elders we're reaching out to get to talk to another human being, get to speak with somebody who actually cares about them and knows that they're there and wants to be helpful. And at least in our experience, something as simple as that can make a tremendous difference, because a lot of the mental health struggles that many of our folks are dealing with is some sense of complete invisibility and being forgotten at this time of tremendous public health crisis. So just one example to offer on something that could be considered on the mental health front.
Thank you, Michael. Daniela or Jeffrey?
Yes, I think right now we don't have information so specific about this because we are currently in the pandemic. But of course, I think it is a very important problem that we have to address. I think that in the United Nations, I think it said that discrimination for age, it will be increased because this COVID-19 or older people is a population of risk. It may be increase of discourses around this is a health problem around older people. So it could be a discrimination around this, and if you sum up the discrimination for sexual orientation and gender identity, this will be worse. So yes, of course, it could have some challenges around mental health. And obviously, as I said, the abandonment of this population will be a problem, or it will be a radicalization of the abandonment of oblivion of these people.
Daniela, oh, sorry, Jeffrey, go ahead. I'll go back to Daniela with the second part of that question. Jeffrey, please.
Now, I was just going to share that we guys are currently working on a survey. It's going to be both qualitative and quantitative. We are hoping to disaggregate it in terms of age, so that we can understand the different responses based on age. And then out of this, we'll be able to understand what exactly is happening and the impact of COVID in our community.
Thank you. We have about 4 more questions. I'll put one to Daniela. In Central and South America, are there records of LGBT elderly people living in the streets?
I don't have a specific information around this, but I think this is also related because there is no data. As I said, there are some problems that are not prioritized, and sometimes the NGOs can develop this investigation and the state wash their hands. So I think there is no data because this topic is not important, but I think there exists, because if you think about it, there are a lot of LGBTQ people that is in poverty, and also that are unemployed or underemployment. So if you think in this as a chain or a social chain, the reality is very unequal for this population. And we know also that there is a tendency of abandonment in general of older adults. So I think this is a very important problem, but sadly, I don't have a specific data around that. But again, I think because this topic is not like important for the state.
Thank you, which leads me to the next grouping of questions, which are related to research. So another question from Farah Rahman: what are the key priority areas for research involving older LGBT communities of LMICS? I'm not sure what that means, Farah, if you want to put that in the chat to help me out. And then related, from Francis Zainodine: given the absence or scarcity of government programs, it is mostly up to NGOs like SAGE to conduct research, provide services, etc. Funding is therefore crucial. How to do this successfully? Oh, thank you. So Farah says LMICs is lower middle income countries. Thank you very much for educating me on that. So I'll put the questions about research to the whole panel, whoever would like to start. And fundraising.
Maybe just to say that if you've heard from my presentation, it is important for us to understand the quality of life of older LGBT persons. Then it will be able to help us want to set programs and priorities for programs, especially in Africa, and also discuss issues around policy and just how to continue engaging and improving the program. That is one thing that we have not been able to do. The quality of life, access to services, which is health services, things around mental health, maybe inclusion within communities. Those would be my priorities right now.
And I can, this is Michael, I can speak briefly to the question of resources and funds, which is a very difficult challenge in this work, and certainly, Jeffrey and Daniela and I and our organizations have been involved in some joint efforts to attempt to raise funds to support this work in our countries, and those, it's been tough. It's been tough to accomplish that. I would say that what that means is that it increases the importance of collaboration and technical support and cross-learning across our organizations, so that we can figure out how we can do as much as we can with few resources. And I think on that theme, organizations like SAGE, the Alianza Americana, the International Federation on Aging, and Outright International can all be helpful in terms of providing at least kind of technical assistance and guidance in this work, depending what the topic is. And I think there's much more collaboration we have to do to come together to pressure private philanthropy, private foundations, and governmental entities to step up to the plate and provide funding to support this work.
Thank you. Daniela, did you want to add anything to that?
Just that our key priority areas, I think, yeah, we have to talk about abandonment. I think we have to talk about access and protection of sexual and reproductive rights, and also how we introduce the views of intersectionality in these topics.
Thank you. So we're now to our last question. Again, from Farah. Thank you for being so productive. And Michael hinted at some of this, but I'd love to hear from all the panelists what your opinions are. In countries where LGBT rights are not established or accepted legally, where can we seek support for collaboration, advocacy, and technical support? Second part of the question, can you please name some international organizations and associations, probably other than ones Michael already listed, to whom the local organizations can seek support from to execute their interventions? Anyone can start.
I think for the first part of that question, in countries where there's still criminalization, there are community efforts like which are registered, like my organization is registered, so we can still have those collaborations. There are other organizations like the Gay and Lesbian Coalition of Kenya. There is one in Nyanza called Nyawek. So there are organizations that are able to work within such settings. For internationally, I know those AMSHA, African Men's Health, Sexual Health and Rights. It was one that has been there ever since 2010, I think. So there's still opportunities for collaboration. SAGE has played a key role. We still reach out to SAGE at any particular point when you need advice, and in some of the programs we'll read articles from online that SAGE has been able to develop. And there we also get resources on things that we need to work on.
Thank you. Daniela, you want to close us out?
Yes, can you repeat? Sorry, like.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you. What are the key I'm sorry. In countries where LGBT rights are not established or accepted legally, where can we seek support for collaboration, advocacy, and technical support? Can you please name some international organizations, associations to whom the local organizations can seek support from to execute their interventions? Okay,
sorry, it's because I didn't want to make a mistake.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think this is a very complicated topic because it is passes because of the security of the people that are doing advocacy in these countries that could be very risky, and they face a lot of violence. I think alliances is where they are very important, because maybe if in this country they can make their voices loud, other countries can help to reproduce this information. So I think alliances could be very important, but obviously there is these challenges to have good alliances. And also we can make work together, because we can, from our experience and being respectful of this context and the experience of other ones, we can like help them. Okay, maybe we can arrange this way to do advocacy for these topics where are not legally accepted. And other organizations, I think Michael saved some of them, but I think it is important, obviously, to make a list, because maybe these ones are more from America, and obviously this is a problem around the world. So I think we must do a list of of that.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panelists and all of our attendees. I have a few closing comments. We are looking forward to IFA's 15th Global Conference, which is March 3rd through 5th in Niagara Falls, Canada. SAGE, EGAL Canada, and IFA are putting together a day-long institute, taking care of our own and building an inclusive future together. It's a day filled with workshops, panels, and networking events, all focused on improving the lives of LGBTQI older people to celebrate our shared accomplishments. We will conclude the day with an intergenerational party, dance party. So join us to connect with one another, share resources, programs, and practices that work in our communities, form a peer network, and co-create a vision for a future where LGBTQI people of all ages are affirmed and welcomed. You can learn more and register for the conference at ifa2020.ngo. Attendees of this panel are invited to inform the discussions for the next webinar in this series and should email IFA their topics or issues of interest by July 1st. The contact email and further details will be made available following this webinar. The webinar is now closed. Thank you.
Thank you.